Welcome to Straight Science. Straight Science is an evening seminar series put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus here in Nome, and also University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant. And we're in the work office tonight. So before I begin, know that there seems to be some geomagnetic event affecting the country, affecting Zoom, affecting other countries. And so if we lose people or people disappear or our speaker or myself disappear, we will be trying to climb back on. So stand by one. And if we get blown off, we will, hopefully, Ken, you'll reschedule. All
Sounds
right.
good.
So Ken Tape, tonight we're talking about beavers in the Bering Strait region on their westward and northward travels. Ken is a research professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute, and he's no stranger to street science. He was here in October of 2022, kind of with the start of things and some preliminary results. And so 2 years later, we're very excited to hear how it's going. And along with everything else changing in the region, we've got beavers repurposing our tundra. So not much we can do about those guys, but we'd like to learn more. So with that, we're really glad you're here, Ken Tape, and we want to know a non and a thon. What are those beavers up to, and what are they doing, and what should we expect in the future, and what have you found? So with that, please take it away. And like I say, we're glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Gay. Thanks for hosting this. This is great. It's always a little different speaking to folks in Western Alaska and in Northwest Alaska, either virtually or in person, because I'm really describing things that you have observed or that they have observed more or less in their backyard. And so feel free to interrupt me or ask questions that, sort of are more locally relevant. But we certainly focus a lot on, sort of the local to global implications of this change that's underway. My name's Ken Tape. I'm from UAF. At the moment, I'm actually in Anchorage at the hospital dealing with a family medical thing, and I'm down here for a couple of weeks. So this is not my office. This is a hospital, and hopefully things won't go sideways and I won't get kicked out of the space. This is very exciting. Glad to have you guys here. This picture right here is from last August. This is the Woolek River in Northwest Alaska. The Red Dog Mine is in the watershed of the Woolek River, but that's not really why we chose the Woolek River to do some of the sampling. The Woolek also flows down to Kivalina, and it's got the world record Dolly Varden trout fish run is in the Woolek River. So it's a big time subsistence river, a big time sport fishing river for those who can get to it. It's very remote. And it's also the northern range limit of salmon. And I'm just trying to give you a little background to give you an idea of what you're looking at here. So this is the Woolek River right here. This is part of our team right here. Some people are fishing. Some people are making measurements in this beaver pond. Some people are flying drones nearby to map the area. And these are brand new beaver dams in the last 5 years. And this would have been good salmon spawning habitat here. It's also the northern range edge of salmon. So beavers and salmon actually have approximately the same northern range edge right now of actually spawning successful salmon runs, chum salmon in this case, and the northern range limit of beavers, which is basically the continental divide of the Brooks Range. So it's a super exciting time in that scientifically, in that things are happening rapidly. Beavers are moving into these new areas. They interact with fish. They interact with the entire landscape. That's what I'll try to talk about today. And of course, this movement of beavers into the tundra is happening in the context of a lot of different climate change impacts on the landscape, which of course you'll be familiar with. Tundra fires or fires in the boreal forest as well are increasing. You've got shrinking glaciers. You've got some thawing permafrost. This is actually a figure that we put together with National Geographic in 2019. It was one of the fold-out pieces, and this is sort of an idealized diagram that's supposed to capture some of the different changes that are going on in the Arctic. You've got some thawing ice wedges here and some ponding as the permafrost thaws. Got a beaver dam up here. You've got the expansion of shrubby vegetation in the tundra. As summers get longer and warmer, you get a lot more vegetation productivity. Again, these are things that'll be very familiar to people who live in Western or Northern Alaska, all of these things. Moose are new in the last century in Northern and Western Alaska, depending on exactly where you live. And then, of course, we have beavers, just barely made it. Our research program was pretty young at this time, and we were really new to this topic. So it was exciting to see beavers make it into this figure. So I just have a few repeat photos, very short sort of anecdotes about these general landscape changes that are occurring. This is a photo from 1957 by Ed Sable. Here's one from 2007 that I took. This is way up in northeastern Alaska on the North Slope. This is that idea of expanding shrubby vegetation. And the permafrost is actually thawing here too. So you look at like this scarp here, this ice cord slope, and you can see how it's just collapsed. The pond's actually still here. But, you know, longer and warmer summers, you get a lot more extensive shrubby vegetation. Part of the reason I mention that is that shrub herbivores like beavers and moose respond to these increases in their habitat. Another sort of climate change repeat photo here is 1907. Ernest Leffingwell, this is in the Eastern Brooks Range, so very northeastern corner of the state. By 2007, you can see that glacier has retreated a long ways. I was actually standing next to Matt in 2007 for this century repeat, and it's fun to like stand in this place a century later and repeat the photo from the original explorer. You often kind of feel their presence at that moment. And then perhaps the most alarming of these repeat photos is this one. I can't see the date at the top because everyone's faces are blocking it, but I think it's 2006 maybe to 2013. Anyway, over a very short period, this is the Canadian High Arctic.
2005.
2005, thanks, Kay. So 2005, this is the Canadian High Arctic. You can see this very planar surface that probably took millennia to form. And by 2013, temperatures got warm in that intervening period. It thawed that permafrost, the water flows away, and you end up with this thermokarst, which again, most of you are probably familiar with. So this is just kind of a smattering of the context that beavers are moving into, right? There's a changing landscape, and they're sort of exploiting increases in their habitat. So I'll talk briefly about moose as well. This is the Nanashuk River in the Northern Brooks Range. And I show this as a trip I went on, well, many years ago now. But the reason I show this picture is there's no moose habitat in this picture, right? It would be very odd if you saw a moose kind of like standing out on the open tundra here. You know, moose like shrubs in the winter, right? They need shrubs to eat. They need shrubs for cover from predators. And so this is from the Seward Peninsula. This is actually east of Salmon Lake. So, you know, north of Nome, 30 or so miles. And now you're getting into an area of the Arctic that has enough shrubs to support moose. And indeed, if you look around Nome, you will see moose, you know, in these shrub patches here and there. And this is actually up on the North Slope. Here's a cow and a calf. Again, this is a pretty sparse shrub patch. You need really more shrubs than this to support moose. But as shrubs have expanded on the landscape over the last century, moose have been able to exploit that change. And so, you know, my thought was, and this is going back, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago now, but looking at some of these changes in vegetation, climate through the lens of wildlife. And I started to think about moose because I thought, well, you know, if this shrub expansion thing is happening like we believe it is, and it's getting warmer, winter's getting shorter, summer's getting longer. If we went back in time, were there moose out in these tundra regions? And so using a combination of historical resources and the basic question of sort of when the first moose was shot in these various villages in Western Alaska, I was able to create this map of moose distribution. So the brown dotted line is moose distribution during these different periods. So, and of course, the green line here is tree line, right? So this is tree line. So everything north and west of this line is essentially treeless tundra. And what I found, surprisingly, was that if you go back 100 years in northern and western Alaska, there were no moose in those regions. And we speculate that moose have been, exploiting increases in their habitat, that is the shrubs, and shorter winters and things like that to move into northern and western Alaska. And I found that pretty surprising because having grown up more recently in northern and western Alaska, I just thought of moose as part of the landscape, but they haven't actually been there for a super long time. All right, so that going back to this figure, I didn't cover tundra fires, but you saw the retreating glaciers, you saw a picture or two of permafrost thaw, you saw the shrub expansion over here, talked briefly about moose. And at some point I started thinking, well, what's the next creature that we expect to wander into the tundra? And beavers made the short list, partly because it seemed like the tundra might be favorable for them, but also just because they're super interesting creature. They're not just responding to these changes, but they're imparting their own engineering on the landscape. And so at some point, this one's maybe a little bit out of order, but we made the discovery that I don't even say we made the discovery. We realized that beavers were moving into the tundra by looking at satellite imagery, the formation and disappearance of beaver ponds through satellite imagery. And so I founded this network of scientists and indigenous knowledge holders and land managers called the Arctic Beaver Observation Network. And that was really what we realized is this isn't just happening in northern and western Alaska, it's happening all the way across Canada as well. And so it's really an attempt to coordinate research, local knowledge, and management of this issue. And this was just a meeting we had a year ago at UAF, which was super interesting and super fun, like one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my career. We had people from across, from Ungava Bay, Hudson Bay, the Inuvik area, scientists, indigenous knowledge holders. We had folks from Western Alaska, from Kotzebue and Selawik at the meeting, lots of researchers as well, some land managers. And so it was just a really, really interesting meeting, talking about all the different things that beavers affect and ultimately, what sort of things we might be able to do in the future to deal with this issue. So this is what it looks like in satellite imagery and historical photography when beavers colonize an area. So this upper photo, it's red, it's color infrared photography. So it's actually, everything that's red is actually green, right? So this is a stream on the Seward Peninsula that's, maybe as wide as an office, flowing right to left. And this is what it looks like in 1980. And then in 2019, it's been colonized by beavers and just completely transformed. All these black areas are water bodies. These are all dams. You're seeing some lodge, dam, and there's tons of dams in here, more than you can even really count. And if you look at the scale, a lot of these dams are over 100 meters long. So, and I should say, before we studied beavers, we studied landscape change in the Arctic. We were just interested in how the landscape was responding to the climate change. And I would just say that this is super dramatic compared to a lot of the things that we had encountered up to that time. So just from a scientific perspective, this is a super interesting question for us to explore. And little did we know that Jamie Smith, the local cartoonist in Fairbanks, essentially prophesized this all back in 2001, if you look at the date there. But this is essentially the scene that is unfolding across northern and western Alaska by the hundreds, is that beavers are looking out into these new areas, undammed streams with, viable habitat, and moving into them and transitioning them to something totally different, probably accelerating the effects of climate change by establishing these beaver ponds, which turn out to act a little bit like oases. They're warmer, greater biodiversity, greater disturbance. They're more dynamic, and they're essentially accelerating the effects of climate change in those locations. So here's another example. I think this one's actually not that far from Nome. I'm thinking this is west of Nome, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 miles. I'd have to look exactly where it is, but here it is in 2003. There's again that little stream that's maybe as wide as your office or wide as a conference table. And then by 2016, beavers have moved in and really changed the area a lot. So the big science questions we are asking and trying and working on is, what is the scale of beaver engineering in the Arctic, and how is that changing? And for Alaska, we now know that scale is big, even in just Arctic Alaska alone, which does not include anything north of the Brooks Range. So it's just sort of northwestern Alaska, Seward Peninsula, Selawik lowlands, Kotzebue area. I mapped approximately 12,000 beaver ponds using satellite imagery. So the scale is huge, and it's also changing very rapidly as they kind of go stream by stream and re-engineer them. And the other really difficult but also exciting question scientifically is, what is the nature of these impacts in the Arctic? And so we're talking about fish, clean water, carbon site. Those are a couple big local, questions of great local interest. How are beavers affecting clean water, fish? And then more global questions like, how do they affect permafrost, carbon cycling, biodiversity, right? They affect almost everything. When you take a stream and turn it into a miniature wetland, everything's going to change. And so I say it's exciting scientifically because no one person has the expertise to answer all those questions. And so that's why this is very much a collaborative effort to try to understand how beavers are affecting Arctic streams, Arctic freshwater ecosystems. So for permafrost, we can see that these ponds thaw permafrost, and that makes a lot of sense. And we have some background in studying permafrost. When you put a pond on frozen ground, when you dam up a stream that's surrounded by permafrost and maybe even underlain by permafrost, and you build a pond, you immediately start to thaw that permafrost, both underneath and laterally. And a lot of these other questions we're working on, we have sort of partial answers to, and I'd be happy to discuss more at the end. So here's what that expansion looks like in satellite imagery, and just to give you a little bit of the scale of it. So this is Kotzebue, way up in northwest Alaska. I'm looking at most of you and I'm thinking, you guys all know what Kotzebue is. Usually I have to explain that, but I don't here. In 2002, right behind Kotzebue, there were 2 dams. By 2019, there were 98 dams. So that's what beaver colonization of these freshwater ecosystems look like. I could tell you that the number of beaver dams in western Alaska, northwestern Alaska, has doubled in the last 20 years, and that would be true, but it sort of masks what's actually happening at the local level, which is that stream by stream, these streams are being transitioned to a new state. If you look at a little bit bigger area, that's Baldwin Peninsula like this, in 2010, there were 94 dams. In 2019, there's over 400. So again, when we talk about the scale of beaver engineering and what's going to happen in the future, that gives you a little idea of what it looks like. Here's a map of beaver pond density in northern Alaska. So you recognize this is northern Alaska. Everything that's gray is the boreal forest, and everything that's colored is tundra. And this is pond density, so the number of ponds per area. And so these bright yellow areas have tons and tons of ponds. This would be the Selawik lowlands. This is the area around Nome, which is, pretty high density in terms of beaver ponds. And you can see there's other areas out in here. If you got to Point Lay, or Point Hope or Point Lay, beavers are just getting to those areas now. Here's what's wild. When we model this distribution of beaver ponds, the sort of things that control like where they are now, it turns out temperature is a very big factor, which I don't think is that surprising. When we model that into the future, we take a model of climate warming and apply it to it and say, well, what is beaver distribution going to look like in 2050, in 2090? By 2050 or 2090, depending on what warming trend you use, the entire North Slope is colonized by beavers. So, this density of beaver ponds around Nome is what the North Slope looks like in, 25 to 75 years, which is really remarkable if you think about all the little streams on the North Slope and the fact that there's going to be, beavers damming up all those streams, and it's just going to be a much more dynamic environment. And again, accelerate the effects of climate change. So thaw, permafrost, that'd be way more dynamic, not as stable. Like when you go back to an Arctic stream year after year, you go back summer after summer, they more or less look the same. The water might be higher because it rained last week, but it more or less looks the same. But as soon as you get beavers into that system, you go back year after year and it looks quite different. Ponds are draining over here, new ponds are being built over here, predators, more shrubs, permafrost thaw. It's a much warmer looking place. So exciting scientifically, but also a little bit scary, I would say, at least a little bit scary. And this red line is the continental divide of the Brooks Range. So the Brooks Range is right here. This is the continental divide. Beavers are at the continental divide of the Brooks Range almost all the way along it. So all they actually have to do is swim downstream, find suitable habitat, and find a mate and start that process. Or as Seth Kantner, the author who wrote Ordinary Wolves, he works on our team quite a bit. As Seth said, he says, or just take a wrong turn, right? Just take a wrong turn and go down that river, and suddenly you have a whole new start. And I should mention too that our beaver team, which I'm usually with those guys on these snow machine trips, but this year is the first year I have not been on the snow machine trip. They just snow machined from Kotzebue to Nome, and they just rolled into Nome, I believe today. I believe this evening they rolled into Nome, came all the way down from Kotzebue, measuring things in these various beaver ponds as they went. So anyway, congratulations to those guys. I wish I could be there, but they can hold their own and then some. All right, so an example of a question that I get sometimes is, do bears and wolves and maybe wolverines or lynx, do these predators respond to this new food source? And we're always kind of like, probably, but we never have a very definitive answer. Just, it's not something that we've studied yet. But then we got this video from a camera on the Seward Peninsula, a little bit east of Salmon Lake. And I'm going to play you a 10-second video, and I'll give you another try if you don't catch it all the first time. All right, so I'm gonna run it again. So we got the one bear in the front, right? What else is going on here? I'm just gonna pause it right there. Right. So this post is supposed to be measuring snow depth, but we set these cameras up just for sort of to catch fun stuff like this. So we got the beaver nervously swimming back and forth here. We've got the other bear over here on the other side of the lodge that's peeking over and going after this beaver, which is pretty fun. Anyway, so I think we can say pretty conclusively that yes, these bears are going after these new beavers. And this is what the ponds look like. And of course, those of you who live out there will know this, but oftentimes I'm just trying to orient people to the Arctic. And well, here's what, a lot of people think or thought. I know a lot of people think that beavers need trees for habitat. They don't. They don't need trees. They barely even need shrubs, right? So they eat these shrubs and they cache these shrubs near their lodge, and then they spend the winter. They don't hibernate. They spend the winter, eating those shrubs, and I think they go into sort of a low expenditure state. Sorry, I didn't say that right, but they basically don't burn a lot of energy in the winter, and they draw from this cache of shrubs all winter. They have their kits, and then in the springtime, they pop out and start all over again. I cheated a little bit. This one's from the Alaska range. This is not technically Arctic tundra, but it's, maybe alpine tundra up high in the Alaska range. So this pond's quite a bit older, and you can tell just from the size and the height of this dam, it's been around for longer. And here's what it looks like in the winter. And again, this might not be that impressive to you guys because you live out in this environment, but I think it's pretty remarkable that beavers are making it in this environment. So one thing, that this is a beaver lodge right here. This is a beaver pond. And so this is maybe 4 years ago, but this is what our team looked like rolling into town today, probably. But if you drill holes in these ponds, drill through the snow, dig through the snow, drill through the ice, we take water samples for a lot of different measurements, but partly we're just trying to see how much water is actually down there. And the answer in a lot of cases is very little. I mean, in a lot of places, the ice from the pond is frozen to the sediment at the pond bottom, but there'll be some little pockets. And in places, it even looks like the beavers are actually excavating pond sediments underneath the ice to keep some lanes open during the end of winter. So it's a pretty remarkable adaptation that they're able to get by in this environment. But they're doing pretty well, right? I mean, look at how many beaver ponds there are around Nome. I mean, it seems like they're loving it. But you can imagine that on the North Slope, for example, ice might be too thick, winter might be too long. It really takes warming to kind of ease those constraints and allow beavers to move into these areas. This is just a little window into our beaver team, and maybe it's my acknowledgements slide as well. This is our group from UAF. There's a couple other people. This is from last summer. Had absolutely hellacious weather in Nome. Gay probably remembers it. What was it? Well, yeah, it was those giant, just torrential rains and wind in, I think, early to mid-August last year. And that was us. And we were out there with a crew from the CBC. We had a film crew out there with us too, and they were troopers. It was challenging, but these guys always have a smile on their face. So here's an example of just all the stuff we're doing. Here's Paige Kehoe is a PhD student studying carbon cycling at UAF. Rodrigo is at the University of Toronto. He does subsurface imaging. So he uses the ground penetrating radar and can actually, in the winter, you can map unfrozen water. So we can see how much unfrozen water at the end of winter is in these ecosystems, that's a general question, but also highly relevant to beavers. Beavers need to have unfrozen water at the end of winter to survive. And he's also mapping ice bodies of permafrost in the summer surrounding these ponds. Mike Laranti at Colgate studies general ecosystem processes. Katie Anthony at UAF studies methane fluxes. So one of the findings we've had is that there's more methane coming out adjacent to these beaver ponds than a normal section of stream, which makes sense, partly because of permafrost thaw, partly because when you saturate vegetation with water and make an anoxic environment, you get methane production. Will Samuel's not pictured here, but we have a proposal, he and I, right now that we're working on. We're really working on the fish side of this question, and I have very few answers for you, unfortunately, about that critical question. but we have a proposal going in a month that hopefully we'll get at some of that. Tom Glass is this gentleman right here, groundwater ecology and permafrost. This is a PhD student. Sebastian's looking at bird diversity, aquatic diversity, including fish, and then riparian vegetation diversity. So his whole PhD is about these different aspects of biodiversity. I hope he gets to finish it someday because it's he bit off a big piece to chew, but it's some really great questions. Ben Jones is my co-pilot in all of this. He's at UAF, studies permafrost and lots of other things, but he's the one who Ben, Sebastian, and Tom rolled in on the snow machines today. Emily Graham is another person who works on it. Anyway, there's lots of folks who are involved in this, many more than you see in this picture. But I just want to give a shout to some of our immediate collaborators. And so a big part of this project, we have, basically a third of our Arctic beaver observation network involves indigenous knowledge. And so Caroline Brown and Helen Cold at the Alaska Department of Fish and Game are working extensively in the communities of Shugnak, Kotzebue, and Noatak, basically asking a lot of the same questions we have here. Will Samuel, the guy who's working on the fish project, he's already been out to Noatak, gone out in the boat with those guys, with local people in Noatak, Seth Cantner and Kotzebue, and then, folks like Cyrus Harris up in Kotzebue and others. So this is a big component, an important component of this project. And again, just getting at a lot of the same questions, but the ones that are more relevant: clean water, fish, 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 and fish. Those are basically, justifiably, right? I mean, the really important questions that they're interested in. Oh yeah, this one. Okay. And then I usually show a few pictures of the Arctic because most people I'm talking to have either never been there or haven't been there very often. Of course, you guys are kind of like, yeah, that's the Arctic, no biggie. This is a cool spot right outside of Kotzebue, and this was a colleague of mine who had never been to the Arctic, but he's a salmon biologist who came up with us this summer, and he was just marveling at this Pleistocene permafrost and recognizing how vulnerable the Arctic is when you realize that a lot of the ground is held together by stuff that looks like this. Oh, hey, Charlie's got his hand up. Cool. And maybe someone can tell me where this picture was taken too.
Go ahead, Charlie. I think we're taking pictures, right? I mean, questions. Ken, you said that
that's
you
cool.
wanted to
Yeah.
be interrupted. Okay.
Yeah, and he may have
And
had
we
his
also
hand up
have
for a long
a
time.
chat that I'll read out as
Okay,
well.
I'll get
Go
the chat.
ahead, Charlie, first.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a retired fish biologist. I started being a biologist in the Nome or in Norton Sound in 1981, and I've probably flown half the aerial surveys for salmon in Northwest Alaska for the state. So anyway, I watched the beavers colonize the Seward Peninsula in 1981. They were not yet into the Tabachaluk or the Elam drainages, and within a year they were present. By 1984 they were really numerous. By then they had traveled into the Fish River system. Within another year, 85 or 6, they were in the Nome subdistrict, and continued. We had some tough winters then in the early 90s, and this initial wave of beaver came in, and they kind of decimated the willows. And in some places the dams were more gravel than they were willows. Then the population collapsed a little bit, and then it came back to what it is today, and what is about as high as it was in the late 80s. Coincidentally, in that same time period, Coho salmon colonized the Seward Peninsula. Well, they multiplied fourfold, and I attribute that to overwintering habitat for smolt. And we've done studies, NSEDC, LGL, did studies on rearing salmon, and the 2-year-old smolt, not the 1-year-old, the 2-year-old smolt utilize beaver dams really heavily to overwinter, and they eat all the 1-year-olds, the 2-year-olds do. So, but beaver dams provide a really good rearing habitat for coho. And I could keep going, but there's a number of streams that the chum and pink salmon were eliminated from by beaver, but we traded coho salmon for those chum and pinks. And so that I know a lot about salmon distribution and how it changed once the beavers came in. And they really do affect salmon. So I just wanted to say that and get it out there.
That's so great to hear. I think what's your last name, Charlie?
Lean like I used to be.
You know,
Yeah,
I think I saw your name mentioned a lot. I've heard your name come up before on this topic. Other people have mentioned it, but I think I also saw it in that what is it, Bering Strait, Norton Sound, subsistence fish or salmon report. I don't know. It's going back 10 or 15 years, but I think a lot of your observations were in there. That's super helpful, and I think it's really interesting how you're pointing out that beavers are facilitating coho runs. At the same time, they're kind of having a negative effect on chum and pinks. If that's what I understood your comment.
Yeah, that's right. There's the smaller streams, the ones you're talking about, you can jump across, or 20 feet wide. They're the ones the beavers can block completely. The larger streams, the spring flood blows the beaver dam, and so the main channel stays open. But a number of small coastal streams got completely converted to coho.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in continuing this conversation. Actually, are you on email, Charlie, or phone, or what's the best way to reach you?
We can get you Charlie's info if you don't have it right there, Charlie.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I prefer to talk by phone.
Phone's great,
and typing's a real pain in the butt, so I'm a better talker.
Okay, and I can hit it. Gay can provide that information to me afterwards. Does that work for you, Charlie?
Yep, that'd be good.
That'd be awesome, because like I say, a younger guy named Will Samuel just did his master's work on beavers and fish in the Fairbanks area, and he's really been working for the last couple of years to spin up some work in northwestern and western Alaska. And I think having someone with your experience to talk to would be super helpful. So that'd be great. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
And this is Gay. I'll chime in too. Thank you, Charlie. I'll chime in too, because I was going to mention this at the end, but since we're on this, there was at the Beluga years ago, the Beluga Whale Committee, which is the co-management group for beluga whales, has representation from 6 of the communities in eastern Norton Sound. And this would be quite a few years ago. There was a meeting, and beluga movements were being talked about as changing. And
yeah, I remember this one, I think. Go ahead.
Okay. And I don't know if you've been able to capture that, because I'm sure it's in the meeting minutes, but there was the biologists, federal biologists that don't live in the region, but they have the, the Management and Research Authority over beluga. So they were talking and saying, well, the belugas, we don't know why they might be shifting their movements in eastern Norton Sound. And it was an older gentleman who was describing the beavers, and there was a little, we're here to talk about belugas, not beavers, kind of exchange. And but he was persistent, and it was that the beavers are changing the ecology of the rivers so that the forage fish or the types of fish are changing. So has anyone looked to see the beaver beluga relationship there? So that was very a good lesson for me to watch that exchange and to listen to. So hopefully you can capture something like that in your with your subsistence team. And then Austin Amosic has in the chat that he's been trapping beaver for over 30 years here in western and northwestern, west and northwest of Nome. There's something to learn from the beaver. They are persistent, incredibly tough, and incredibly resilient in our conditions. They remind me that animals like beavers aren't something you just trap. They are something that can be valued. They are incredible food resources. Beaver meat is perhaps the best there is, amongst the best there is. The castor glands and oil glands can be used for scents for other animals, and the fur is, as we know, incredible. Thank you, Austin.
I love that comment. It's so true. I mean, Austin has been dealing with beavers for much, much longer than I have. But just in the last 10 years that I've been studying them pretty intensively, it's hard not to develop a deep respect for the animal, both the way that their adaptations, right? The way that they avoid predators, the way they create their own habitat. I mean, it's a lot like people. But also just the value of, fur, castor, the meat, the fatty tail. Like there's a lot, and I'm sure he could speak to that better than I could, but there's really a lot to use there. And that's of course why they were trapped so heavily, for several hundred years. I see Julie has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm in my bathrobe, so I'm not putting my camera on.
It's cool.
It's late here. So I'm just fascinated by the fact I always associate the beavers with some kind of shrubs, but you're saying they don't need the shrubs necessarily. And I was just wondering if we look at all this early Holocene beaver chewed wood, is there a way we can say anything about how wooded was it? We can look at the size of the wood that they chewed on, but are they like consistently 40, 50 kilometers out from tree line, or do you have any opinion there? And also one other question, do wolves or fox go after the beavers?
Wolves do.
Okay.
I don't think foxes can, but wolves definitely do. It's not something that I have evidence of in the Arctic specifically, but in all other ecosystems, wolves and bears go after beavers. And to your question about, do they need shrubs? Well, and sort of, yeah, like, so what Julie's referring to is up by Kotzebue, there's these giant coastal permafrost bluffs, and we've been pulling out beaver chewed wood from some of the old permafrost, and we've dated that wood, and it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, but most of it's sort of in the 8 to 10,000 year old range.
Yep. Early
And
Holocene warm period.
Yep, early Holocene warm period. But one of the questions is like, okay, so they were in this. Was it Arctic back then, right? Or was it kind of forested? And there was a paper from 1966 that showed that there were some I think it was trees. I'm not sure if it was poplar trees or maybe spruce trees, but this summer there's a postdoc named Neve Baker who is coming out with us, and she's going to take soil plugs next to these pieces of beaver chew and then do aDNA, which is ancient DNA, on those plugs, and hopefully get at that question you're asking of, how shrubby, or were there trees there? I think there were trees there at that time, but
yeah.
Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I'm going to take some of the wood I've got and give it to a person I just learned about who could identify the wood, what type of wood it is. So I'll share it with you when I get that information.
Awesome. I'm excited. And, here's the thing. Most beaver pond, like if you go to a beaver pond in a Nome area, there's shrubs everywhere. Part of the reason I say that they don't need shrubs is that I do see ponds in areas that don't have a ton of shrubs, but there's always some shrubs around.
Right.
So it's not that they don't need them, it's just that they don't seem to be limiting. I mean, these streams on the Seward Peninsula, they're just shrubs everywhere. And the fact that the beavers have chewed down some of those shrubs is hardly noticeable now. Now, it might have been back in 1980 when there were a lot fewer shrubs, like Charlie's talking about. The beavers move in and all of a sudden they have a really noticeable effect. But most of the areas they are now, there's tons of shrubs. Shrubs doesn't appear to be limiting. One thing that probably is limiting is groundwater, the water in winter. And so that, if I had to guess, I might guess that as permafrost thaws, you get more groundwater in these systems because the permafrost is no longer a barrier between the stream above and the groundwater below. And so you get more connections with groundwater. And that seems to me, because if they run out of water in the winter, it's kind of game over, and maybe Austin or Charlie have some comments, guys who have been out there observing it more have some comments about that. But what I see is just as permafrost thaws and it gets warmer, we get a lot more water in winter. And that's a really good thing for beavers. If they have that year-round water, they're probably in pretty good shape.
So
Otters eat.
Yep. So
Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say for Julie, I have one question and
Otters.
and
Interesting.
also in the chat, Charlie was nice enough to put in that otters. So these would be river otters, eat beaver and can wipe out colonies. So
I
that helps
guess
in your
now that he mentions it, I have seen and not personally seen, but I've seen videos of otters predating on beavers. But yeah, it's not on the tip of my tongue, so I appreciate that.
And then my question to
Wow.
Julie is, where are you calling from? It's a little early for bathrobe wearing in Nome, but you may be calling from further east. So I was just curious where you're calling in from.
I'm in Massachusetts.
Oh, well done. Okay. I'm an old Rhode Islander by birth, so
Okay.
welcome. Thanks for joining. That's awesome.
Hey,
Go
Dean.
ahead, Dean.
Yeah, hello. First of all, great talk. Really enjoyed it. You've done a great
Appreciate it.
job here. Lodge construction materials. You can map that. Have you attempted anything like that? I mean, if you come in here to Fairbanks and you hit the various lodges and you say, oh, look, I got this tree, I got this shrub, and you can do the same thing up in the Nome area. I was just wondering, how much variability is there?
I think you probably know the answer to that better than
No,
I
I
do.
don't. I'm a phytoplankton person. I know nothing about beavers except they look great.
Uh-huh. So sort of like sourcing the material for the lodge.
Yeah. I mean,
We
you've
haven't
been
done any.
talking about different shrubs and things.
Yeah.
You even mentioned a gravel lodge. I think it'd be neat to see a map of the different types of material lodges.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. And the other
Yeah.
thing is, I really liked your moose limit map, the
Uh-huh.
one that you showed early on.
Sure.
I'd like to see a musk oxen, a caribou, and perhaps some of the predators mapped in the same way. And
Yeah,
I
sure.
think that could be really valuable. But again, a great job you've done.
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate
the,
those comments.
the system's changing, and we tend to want to make it go, is this bad or is this good?
Yeah.
It's going to have effects on all of your components. Some are going to thrive from it and some aren't. But I think you're doing a great job, so keep it up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's a keen comment. There's my background originally was in geology and a little more physical science, and so there's always a want to like simplify things into narratives that you can communicate in a half an hour or 45 minutes. But the reality is it's way more complex than that. So you look at something like moose moving in the Arctic. Yeah, it's climate change and shrubs. That's part of it. But predation, disease, other unknown factors could be playing a large role. And so particularly with moose, I would say shrubs are and the length of winter and the length of summer. I think those are important factors, but they're definitely not the only factors. They're maybe the only factors that we can wrap our head around easily, right? And it's probably similar with beavers. Although I don't know, with beavers, well, for one thing, you have rebound from overtrapping, right? So part of the change that we're seeing is rebound. I mean, beavers return to Michigan, beavers return to California. We're not saying that's climate change. That's just beavers reoccupying their former range. And so this is where things get really tricky in Alaska. What was their former range? That turns out to be a pretty difficult question to answer. Now you've got indigenous knowledge. So when people in Shishmaref or Kotzebue or, Noatak tell you that, Inupiaq are not beaver people, and you can contest that, but that's what Cyrus Harris said, or that it's really not part of their traditional knowledge. Beavers aren't part of the traditional hunt. I tend to believe that, but exactly where were beavers in 1600? That's what I'd like to know. I think probably they were limited to forested areas and maybe even a more constrained distribution than that. But I'd be curious if any of you have thoughts on that question. You can look at archaeological sites too, but it's more gray than black and white when you do that. I'd be curious if you guys have thoughts on that.
One last quick question. Is beaver
Yeah.
fever moving north too?
The USGS actually has a project. So we've done a bunch with Giardia, but believe it or not, and again, this is not my area of expertise, but I was shocked to learn that there is not a standardized test for Giardia.
Love it. Yep. Okay,
Right?
thanks.
Which just, yeah. So probably, lots of biodiversity and biota are moving north with beavers, and probably Giardia is part of that. But we don't have the evidence yet. The USGS, I think, has a fairly thorough study underway, and I'm guessing in the next year we'll have a decent answer to that question, which is exciting.
Excellent. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dean. Where are you from, Dean? Sorry.
Way
You in
off,
Fairbanks?
we're in Irving 2
Oh, okay, cool,
down the
Fairbanks.
street.
perfect. Yeah, I'm down in Anchorage, so.
Yeah.
But usually I'm in Fairbanks. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
So there's also in the chat, in line with Charlie's comments about otters, Austin wrote, I agree, the big buck otters get in there and are probably impacting beavers, especially in that fall period. I've trapped those big otters in my beaver sets. Another issue, I think, is younger beaver getting froze out.
Yeah, those are great.
freeze up.
Those are great comments. Sorry, did someone say something?
Ooh, they get froze out when we have an early freeze up.
Yeah.
Or a hard freeze up.
Or just a long winter, right? Or low snow. Like that's another thing. If you get a year where you get some snow, but the snow gets blown off the pond for whatever reason, you end up getting really thick ice. But yeah, I appreciate you guys bringing the otter thing to my attention, because I was sort of vaguely aware of it, but I've never answered and said, oh yeah, otters are a predator of beavers. But you're absolutely right. That's cool. I'll mention that to our team.
Any other questions? I have one. If we're coming up on 7:25, so I don't know what your time zone is. I know your time zone, but I don't know what your time commitment is to answering our questions and stuff, because obviously you're in Anchorage for other reasons that are.
I probably can't answer your question anyway, but shoot.
All right. Well, my question is, now that there's this impact seen by beavers, and you can kind of show that from that, you had a picture with the pond, I think it was 1980. It looked like a little stream, and then 2019, holy cow, that's a big thing. When UAF or any of these larger modeling efforts to look at what's happening in our world here in the Bering Strait region or Northwest Arctic Borough or North Slope Borough, are the modelers including this sort of, the beavers are compounding that thawing, right? My understanding is they're gnawing on things, and they're little beaver dams, and that water is helping even more thaw our permafrost even faster. So this is a problem out in this town. Actually, there's buildings that are you know, this town I think was built on a big plug of ice. Charlie and Austin could address that more than I could, but we see where buildings, you know, are tippy and poles are tipping and people are chucking gravel in their driveway and then chucking more gravel in their driveway to try to keep up with things sinking. Are the models, is there like a, I don't know how you do it, like a formula, or are people able to bring in your work here and sounds like beavers are making us probably go a little even faster than previously thought? If that's a question.
The yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? Is when you put this on, if you superimpose this on top of these other changes, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And the answer is that no model captures that right now. But, you know, we just submitted this paper that shows what beaver distribution is going to be in 2050 and 2090 in Arctic Alaska, right? So that's kind of the starting point. It's like, okay, we know where they're going to be now, which is everywhere. And now we take the measurements that we've been making around Nome, around Kotzebue, and try to tie those into those spatial models. But it's complicated. And I say that not condescendingly. I don't really understand it myself. But the idea that you can sort of take the changes that we're observing at these beaver ponds and scale that up with wildfires and permafrost thaw, that's kind of the
Warming
the goal.
temperatures.
Warming temperatures, that's the goal.
More rain.
Absolutely.
What it
But-
all is. Yeah.
Yep. Trying to put all that together is you know, that's the goal.
Right. All right. So what is your next plans? Your people are here in Nome. Sounds like they've just arrived to town. Do you know where they're staying? Are they going to be here long? Should we keep an eye out for them in the tundra or?
Yeah, absolutely. We usually stay at the dredge, but I think the dredge got too expensive for us. So we got an Airbnb. They got an Airbnb. I don't know exactly where it is. I think it's a little bit outside of town, maybe. So they're in the area, and if you see those guys, yeah, flag them down, say hello.
Are they here for a little bit or a long bit or?
Probably 2-3 days, not a long
Okay.
bit, just
Not a
because
long bit.
they've been out for a while already. They went to there was a little science conference in Shishmaref a few days ago. I don't know if you guys knew that, but they had their spring
really.
carnival. And so those guys
Spring
bounced out.
carnival.
Those guys bounced out for the spring carnival. They had a little science thing that Kari Erickson organized. You guys might know him. Yeah, they had a cool poster actually that showed the increase in beaver ponds around Shishmaref, you know, over the last 20 years. But yeah, stop those guys. If you see them on the snow machines, they've got big red sleds, big black machines. There's 3 or 4 of them. And yeah, they usually want to stop and chat. So I'm sure they love that.
They've already done their sampling. They're going to kind of rest and then go home, or are they going to be sampling in the region?
They did some sampling on the way in, and there's a couple sites out the Teller Road. One's out Glacier Creek Road, and one's out the Teller Road a little ways. So they have probably one more day of field work to do, would be my guess.
All
But yeah, if you guys want to connect with them and go out in snow machines, shoot me an email. It'd be cool. And I already talked to Gay. You know, we're gonna hopefully, you know, fund some more of this work going forward. And if any of you want to be involved, let me know, because that's a bona fide offer. Like when we come to town, you guys want to get involved or be more heavily involved, you know, monitor instrumentation out there, help us make measurements. We are totally open to that, and would love to involve you. But also just on the conversational level, you know, hearing some of these stories like about the otters, about Charlie's experience, you know, lengthy experience in the region, that stuff's super helpful to us, and we love to BS about beavers. So if you guys like to do that, we're game.
right. Any other questions or comments for Ken? Normally we
This
went,
is Charlie. Can I
go
jump
ahead,
in?
Charlie.
Yeah, so Ken, another limiting factor on beaver is you know, the young beaver get kicked out in the spring and they go off to colonize and they go everywhere. And if they get too late a start, they can't get a dam tall enough to not freeze down over the winter. And the other mistake that young beavers make is that they go too high up on the watershed, and then in the winter there's no winter water source, and the pond freezes. So lots of streams here in Nome have springs intermittently as you go upstream, and just like salmon, the last spring is the upper limit of overwintering. So if the beaver builds above the highest spring, they freeze out. And that's I've seen that in a number of locations.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Charlie.
that's super keen. Super keen. Totally agree. I mean, we see just how much they target springs around Nome. Like that,
Yeah.
that's how we got tuned into this whole groundwater thing, is like, here's your beaver pond and you walk upstream, 30, 50, 100 yards, and there's this spring pouring out of the side of the mountain. It's like, oh yeah, okay, this is liquid all winter. Whereas, as you say, you go above that spring, or you're in some creek that doesn't have that perennial water source, then they're getting squeezed out.
All right, and one thing we didn't do, but Pete, Rob did, and Julie did, was, this is the time. It's never easy to be a straight science public speaker of any kind. I get the butterflies, and this is when we put a little love in the chat for our speaker Ken Tape, because he's taken time out, and obviously, it sounds like something's adrift for you, and we wish the best for your situation. Being in Anchorage and being out here, we know what that's a hard thing. And you were able to still make the time to talk to us out here in Western Alaska. So we always really appreciate anybody, and especially in you zooming in from the hospital. That's an extra thank you for that. And hope everything works out for the best. And with that, next week. So next week's Straight Science is going to be on Thursday, the 24th of April. We have Andy Ramey and Christina Ahlstrom from the United States Geological Survey, Alaska Science Center. And it's a little bit different. Normally, I really try to focus on Bering Strait, but they are going to give us an avian influenza update on the wildlife situation here, birds and wildlife, land animals, and so forth. That is a situation for the Bering Strait region, as of course we have had documented already. Our fox and glaucous gulls have already lit up earlier with avian influenza for us, and this is a topic where we'd like to keep on top of this and be able to hear the latest news. So Andy Ramey and Christina are going to take time from their schedule to bring us information on, I see your hand up, on avian influenza. That'll be Thursday, April 24th. Go ahead, Ken.
And they're the ones who are doing the Giardia study with beavers.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
So I
So
know that's not
tune
what they're
in, Ken,
presenting
and
on.
zing them. Tune in and
Yeah.
zing them with a question that's not avian influenza. That'll be with your beavers. So I'll make sure you get a poster, one of the announcements if you're interested in that. We'd all be interested if you come in and ask your beaver question. That would be awesome. That's legit. Wonderful. So with that, Ken, if you can stay on for like a second after, okay,
Yeah.
that'd be wonderful.
Just a second though, I got to roll.
Yep. And everyone else, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next Thursday, avian influenza. Have a good night, everybody.